Welcome back to the kitchen. I'm Robert at Cooking Brazil, and the second portion of the show today is going to be learning to make Tuscan bread. If you remember from one of my earlier videos, I showed you some Tuscan bread that was in progress. It was actually rising when I first showed it to you. Then I showed you the finished product, and I had it with some of my feijão that I made on an earlier video. Now I'm going to show you everything you need to do to produce 2 loaves of this bread. The recipe that we're going to use, the quantities of things in this can be halved or doubled to make more or to make less, whichever you prefer. If you only want to make 1 loaf, well, simply take the ingredients and cut them in half. The first thing we're going to do, I'm going to wash my hands real quick. I'll be right back, and we'll get in onto the ingredients for you. The first most important thing is going to be the flour. I just use a simple, it's a type 1 bread flour that you can find in any store around here. It's Donna Benta brand. It's type 1. Look for the type 1. Okay, that's what you need. And it's just straight flour. There's no fermento or baking soda. There's nothing in there. Just pure flour, okay? So you need a kilogram of that if you're going to do this recipe. Cut everything in half again if you only want to make 1 loaf. I'm making 2 today. So you've got a large pan for that. You've also got a large pan for rise of this product. You need a big pan, trust me. For this much bread, it's going to expand and it's going to fill this entire bowl. So what you do, you take some extra virgin olive oil and drizzle it into the side of the pan. Doesn't take much, 1/4 cup, even if it's that much, and just make sure you get it all spread around inside the bowl, because when you put this yeast bread dough in there to rise for a couple of hours, it's going to, and trust me, it will be over the top of the pan by the time it's done. So put the oil in the pan, set it aside until you get the mix ready, okay? You've got, and it's very important with baking, there are very few things that I actually take the time to carefully measure. Making bread or any kind of bakery product, it's like science, and you need to measure carefully. So I have my little kitchen scale over here that I use, and it's adjustable for 0. So whatever container is in there, you put the empty container on, you 0 the scale, then you add your ingredient to measure. Okay, so water, we've got 700 grams of water. Room temperature is fine, filtered water always, measured out carefully. Yeast, you want the active dry yeast, not the instant yeast. Use the active dry yeast. That is like paramount always. Okay, and you need 14 grams of this. Very careful to measure this, all right? If you use too little, it won't be enough for your entire project, and it won't rise correctly, so make sure you measure it, all right? More doesn't hurt a thing. Less, that's a problem. You're going to mix the yeast and, excuse me, I'm reading off my thing here because my memory is terrible for these things. You're going to use 2 teaspoons, 10 grams of sugar, just plain regular table type sugar, okay? You're going to mix that in the water. Take a spoon, get it dissolving. All right, once you've got it dissolved, you're going to take your yeast, you're going to pour it in the water, and just work it around a little bit to make sure that everything is in the water and soaking really good. This part of the process it could take 10 minutes, it could take 15 minutes, it could take 30 minutes, but what you need to do, you're feeding and you're proofing this yeast. Proofing the yeast means you're testing it to make sure it's live and it's going to work in your bread. What's going to happen is after a certain amount of time, it's going to start foaming up and smelling kind of beery. And you want it to dissolve completely and foam up, and believe me, if it's live, it will, and you'll know the difference. Okay, so you've got that mixed and you're going to let it set. We'll talk about the rest of the ingredients here. Okay, salt. The salt, 10 grams of salt. This is a very low salt bread, unlike a lot of breads that use considerably more salt in the mix. This is strictly for the leavening, or the rising of the yeast in the bread. Okay, you're actually going to mix that in your flour before you do anything with it. And I like to throw it in the flour and take a whisk and just work it around. It's easier to mix it now than it is when your dough is wet, because it just is easier. You get a good mix, everything's dry. So you're just going to work it for a few minutes and make sure you get everything kind of blended together, and the salt is pretty well distributed in the flour. Okay, the last ingredient you're going to use is about 50 grams of extra virgin olive oil. This is for flavor in your bread, and it gives it just this warm kind of, olive oily flavor and smell when it starts coming up. It flavors the bread tremendously. If you know anything about baking, the first thing you probably wondered is, why so much water and yeast in this bread? Well, because Tuscan bread is a very moist bread when it's finished. It has a crispy, crusty outside if you want it. And the way you achieve that is by more water in the mix. The dough comes out very sticky. That will change. I'll show you that later. But now what we're going to do, since we're all prepared, we've got our rising pan oiled up, we've got our olive oil unmixed, we've got our salt and flour mixed together, whisked together, so it's ready to go. And the yeast mix is going to sit, and we're going to come back in a little while when it's ready, and I'll show you what it looks like, and we'll start mixing the dough. Okay, so in a little while we'll be back and we'll continue on with the process. All right, see you soon. Okay, we're back. It's been about 20 minutes and I've got a good foam in my yeast mix. I don't know how well you can see this here. I'll kind of hold it up to the camera. As you can see, there's a lot of foamy, looks like foam on top of beer. As a matter of fact, if you put your face up and smell it a little bit, it smells like warm beer also, because that's basically how beer is made: yeast, water, and some other ingredients. So now we're ready for our next step. We've got our flour mix here. We'll put that aside. I forgot my paddle over here, so let me go back and retrieve this real quick. Clean hands, clean tools, my clean marble pastry board right here. I found this after looking and looking for weeks and weeks. I finally decided to have somebody make one, and I looked here in Recreo, and they wanted they wanted 250 reais for this, and I was a little frustrated, and I kind of told the lady. And I shopped around where our school is in the Campo Grande neighborhood, and the same exact stone. It's marble. It's a real high quality marble, polished, rounded corners, trimmed edges, and I put some big silicone feet on the bottom. I got it for 90 reais. Not a bad deal. Okay, I've got my tool. My hands have been washed, and I'm ready to go. So we're going to start incorporating this water yeast mix into our flour, and slowly kind of working it around and getting everything completely mixed. I do it like this initially. I'll take it out in a while and work it on the board after I've mixed it with this, and I've kind of put everything together by hand. So start slow so you don't get too big of a mess in the bowl. And once you get to that point, dump the rest out. Take your little paddle mixer here and kind of work it until the water is pretty much absorbed. You'll still have some dry flour around, but trust me, that will change soon. You can see it's starting to come together a little bit and getting a little flaky, but most of the flour is starting to be absorbed by the, or most of the water is starting to be absorbed by the flour, so you have less and less dry flour. You won't get it all immediately. Let me grab another utensil here. Scrape this off my little spoon with. Might want to do this once or twice and keep mixing for a bit. Make sure you got all that water is absorbed into the flour. Now that looks pretty good. It's ready to be kneaded. So you're going to clean off your paddle here and set it aside. Get all the excess off of there. Clean your knife off. All right. Oops, I forgot a step. We'll do this real quick. The olive oil, very important. Take your olive oil, pour it on top of the mix. A little paddle back here. Sorry about that. Got a little ahead of myself, and you want to just kind of incorporate that into the mix before you dump it out on your board to start working it. Okay, so very important for flavor. This recipe is hundreds of years old. It's been made essentially the same for many, many years. And I got this from a lady who lives in Italy, who loves to cook, and she shared this recipe with me. And I've made it quite successfully many times. Once you get the knack of it, you shouldn't have too much trouble. Okay, that's about all we're going to get from the olive oil. So it'll take a little time, but the rest of it will incorporate very, very well. You'll see the difference. I've got a little extra flour here to flour my board with. Just kind of work some over the board. You don't want to use too much because it dries out your mix and it really doesn't come together right. This is a bit of a sticky dough because it's so wet. So you want to pour the bulk of this out, all the little stuff that's laying in the bottom, get as much of it out as you can. Don't worry about that too awful much though. And you want to kind of scoop everybody together. Start working. Okay. You want to try to get a good consistent ball of dough going here before you start kneading it too much. You just want to get all the pieces to kind of come together, and then just start folding it. Okay, just pretty much like that. You can see I'm not adding any more flour to this. You don't want any more, because what happens is as you fold it, before you put it aside to rise, if you've put too much flour, when you fold, it'll come out in your dough, in your bread, and it'll fall apart. So you want it, it's going to be a little bit sticky. The olive oil is going to help that a little bit in the pan. So now we've got everything to kind of come together. Now we're going to start really kneading this stuff. It's going to take 10 to 15 minutes of this kind of work to really get it to come together right. And you'll see the difference as you go along. I'm going to start it, and then we'll cut away to the finish before we put it in the pan with the olive oil to rise. So let me just do this for a bit. You can see the stickiness. It's not terrible, but there's some. So you want to just kind of mash everything out. All right. Everybody's got their own technique. This is the way I kind of do it. If it's a little too sticky, you can go back. Sprinkle a little bit more flour over it, okay? And just keep working. Fold and press, fold and press, fold and press. It's a very simple bread. It's not complex, so you get more success. You don't have to be a baking technician to make this work, okay? They would call it rustic, I guess. So you can see the face of this thing has kind of changed a little bit. It's starting to smooth out. But it's still going to take some time. You have to work this. You can see how the folds aren't coming together. Important to work all that out so it comes together as a nice tight ball when you're ready. A little bit more flour. Always being careful not to get too much on there. So it's just a matter of folding, squishing it, folding, squishing it, keep going. Once it starts getting a little bit too tacky again, dash a little more flour on it. You won't do this again once it's ready, okay? So what I'm going to do is we're going to stop here with the video, and I'll come back when it's ready to put in the pot with the olive oil to rise, okay? And some more explanation then. So stay tuned, and I'll be back as soon as I can, okay? Bye. Okay, we're back. I've worked on the dough here for about 10 or 15 minutes, adding a little bit of flour as I go along, just to kind of keep the stickiness down. It's still a little tacky though. Clean hands, just washed, and as you touch it, you can feel it sticking just a little bit, but it's not too bad. It will come away properly. This is a pastry knife, and for me, it's just indispensable when it comes to cleaning up the board and cutting your bread dough or you know, 1,001 uses. Okay, we're ready to pick this dough up. We're going to drop it in the bowl that we coated with olive oil. And a little bit of stickiness here. That's normal. You want to see that. Okay. So the reason you put the olive oil in the bowl with this when you leave it to rise is if you don't, you will be very sorry in the end, because the dough will not want to come out of there. All right, we just about got her picked up here, and you can see everything kind of staying together very nicely, very loosely, and it's a nice sticky little mass of goodness going on here. Let me move the bowl over here so where you can see. Set it in the bowl with the olive oil. All right, and you're going to coat the entire thing with the olive oil. All right, the flavor that you get from this when you bake it, after you bake it, is just incredible, the flavor and the smell. So in any event, as you can see, it's all set up. The bowl is nice and oily, so as it rises, it won't stick to the side, and you'll be able to get it out very easily. Let me get a quick wash of my hands, and I'll come right back. Okay, we're ready for the next step here. You can see the dough is nice and oily in its little bowl. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover this with a clean towel. Ta-da, right here, nice clean white fresh towel. And we're going to leave this for at least 2 hours to rise. By the time it finishes rising, it will be completely at the top of this pan, maybe even a little more depending on how well it rises. That is exactly what you want. Then after that, we're going to work it a little bit more before we're ready to put it in the oven. So I'm going to cover this, set it to the side, and we'll see you at the end of the rise, and we'll get on to the next part of the process. And then we'll have some delicious Tuscan bread later with butter. Okay? See you in just a little while. Okay, we're back. Let's take a look at what's going on up underneath this towel right here. We've had the bread rising for a couple of hours, and sure enough, there it is. It's pretty much tripled itself right here, and you can see it's very tender and very fluffy. There's a lot of gas inside of there, and now you're going to see the reason for putting the olive oil in the pan before you put the bread. If you didn't have that bread in there, it would be impossible to get it all out. So first thing we want to do, go back here and spread a little extra flour around, or else you're going to have an olive oily mess all over your board. Next, just tip the pan over Start pouring them out of there. Like I stated in the very beginning, this is enough for 2 loaves of this bread. And this is actually for an order of my spaghetti sauce that somebody asked for, so I've got 2 loaves going to them. But we are going to go through the process anyway. You've actually already seen what it looks like at the very end. So now that we've got it on the table here, get a little extra flour on him so it doesn't just go everywhere. We got to get the air out of there. We're going to punch this down a little bit just to kind of pop all that air out of there so we can start working it just a little bit more again, okay? Not too much extra flour, that's a bad thing, okay? Especially right now, because what will happen is when you fold it up, if you have too much flour on there, when you go to stick it in the oven, it won't go back together again and you'll end up with folded bread. Let me just grab my little tool here. This is the little guy that I was talking about before. It's a pastry knife, and it's one of its other functions is this thing right here. Cut your bread in half. You can use a knife or anything you want for this. This has a lot of good uses in the kitchen, so that's what I use it for. That's one of the things. Okay, so I'm going to take half. We're going to put it back in the olive oil because we're not going to do it exactly right now. We're just going to do this one at a time. We just want to kind of reform this dough ball back into a ball. All right. Try to get it all to come back together again. We don't want any of those folds in there. We want this bread nice and soft and ready to go. And the real trick here is getting this to come back together and make a nice little ball out of it, okay? So you're not going to really knead it so much as just kind of work it, try to form it back. And if it gives you trouble, well, then you need to probably knead it a little bit. And it looks like that's what's going to happen here. So I'm going to kind of press everything back together, okay? Get her formed up here a little bit. There we go. Now what we've got is a nice round ball of bread dough. There might be a few folds in there, but you're never going to detect it. So, and it cooks up really nice. This is a very moist bread. My oven is preheated to right around 250 C. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's about medium on the range of your oven. And all I'm going to do here, put this guy, it works best on a pizza pan because once it expands, it's going to expand some more. It's going to fill up a little bit of this. Just makes it easier to work around it and get it up out of the pan. One thing I like to do with this, just to kind of my little personal touch, let's take my bread knife here, my serrated bread knife, and just go 1, 2, 3. Make 3 little cuts in it. When it's red, this will spread out. It just makes a little design. Just looks kind of professional, you know. I don't know how much it really is. Now, before we put this in the oven, let me just explain a couple of things. This bread, the way it stands, if you put it in the oven and bake it, and bake time is 40 minutes to an hour depending on your temperature. If it's a lower temperature, it might take a little bit longer. If you stay around 250, it's going to be a little quicker. It's a visual thing. You need to know what to look for. Now there's 2 ways to finish this. If you put this in the oven and you want to have a nice tender soft crust on it, what you can do is take a pan of water, put it on the bottom rack directly under the bread. And what this will do is create steam in your oven that will tenderize this crust on this thing. I've tried it like that, and for me it's way too moist. Some people want it that way. Me, I prefer it a little more crusty. So if you don't put anything in there at all for moisture and just let it go till it browns up, that's a sign that it's usually the sign that it's done. And it gives you a little more crunchy, kind of rustic look, which I kind of prefer. Either way, the quality of the bread and the taste of the bread is just delicious. So we've warmed our oven up. Preheat your oven. Preheat your oven. Do not just turn it on and put your bread or anything else in an oven like that. You need to get it to the exact temperature or close before you put your food in there to cook. The reason for this is, if you put this bread in a cold oven, number one, it's just not going to bake correctly, and it's going to be very difficult to tell exactly when it's done. It's going to take a long time because it just won't bake right. This is a very wet, very moist bread, and there's a lot of moisture inside of here that you need to work and bake out of here, or else it's just never going to finish correctly. It won't look right, it won't taste right, it won't finish correctly. Preheat your oven. It's the same way with a lot of foods when you put them in there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop this in the oven, and then we'll come back in a little while and view the results. Enjoy your Tuscan bread. Well, here it is, the finished result. A nice crispy skin loaf of Tuscan bread. Homemade, handmade, with a very old recipe. I'm going to bake the other one now for delivery to my client tomorrow, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you want to try this at home, it's great fresh out of the oven with butter, or it's good with the spaghetti sauce. There's 101 different ways to try it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you on the next one, okay? Thank you very much.